If we live to return, and if we make great discoveries as we expect, the United States has promised to make us great rewards. They were a small party charged with going where no one from the outside world had ever gone, to open one of the last great wilderness regions of Earth, a place they thought might still hold woolly mammoths and other prehistoric creatures. To find out what was really out there and to survive was the equivalent in its day of a journey to the moon. To lead this dangerous expedition, President Thomas Jefferson chose his chief aide, Meriwether Lewis, a skilled soldier and woodsman. He called him a man of courage undaunted, with qualifications as if implanted by nature for this express purpose. He was only 28. Lewis wanted a co-captain for such a long and risky mission. His old Army commander, William Clark, who was 4 years older, an expert map maker and riverman, and a proven leader. Lewis asked Clark to join him.
In this enterprise, with its dangers and honors, there is no man on earth with whom I should feel equal pleasure in sharing them as yourself.
Clark answered Lewis's letter.
My friend, I'd join you with hand and heart.
Many feared they would never return. But if they made it, they would forever change the course of history. At the time, the great powers of the world could only guess what existed in the uncharted West. Native Americans already called this land home, but other nations hoped for a wealth of natural riches and had staked competing claims. Britain to Canada and the Oregon Country, Russia the Pacific Northwest, Spain the West and parts of the South, France an immense tract called Louisiana. By sending an expedition into foreign land, Thomas Jefferson hoped to open the West up for the United States. In 1803, a surprise. Napoleon offered to sell the entire Louisiana territory. The U.S. quickly purchased it for $15 million, more than doubling the size of the nation. To cross this unknown land would be among the most ambitious and difficult journeys ever conceived. Clark wrote in his journal,
All in health and readiness to set out, boats and everything complete with the necessary stores of provisions, though not as much as I think necessary for the multitude of Indians through which we must pass.
They pushed off upstream from St. Louis. Young American soldiers and French-Canadian rivermen hand-picked for strength and wilderness skills. Among them, a man named York, Clark's slave and companion since childhood. All were leaving their families behind for years. Their main mission was to find a water route to the Pacific and the Orient beyond, the long-hoped-for Northwest Passage. Lewis was a studious and solitary man, Under Jefferson, he had been trained to observe and record for science every new thing he saw, and he spent hours exploring alone with his dog. In this unfamiliar territory, just collecting a specimen could be dangerous. Only 2 days out, Lewis had nearly lost his life, with a long journey still ahead. But a greater challenge they faced every day, the backbreaking work of moving tons of gear upriver against the full flood of the powerful, unpredictable Missouri. William Clark.
The sergeant at the helm run under a bending tree and broke the mast. I am tormented with mosquitoes and ticks.
Meriwether Lewis.
The barge run foul 3 times today on logs. Happily no injury was sustained, though the barge was in imminent danger.
Passed a bad sandbar where our tow rope broke twice. A storm struck our boat and would have thrown her up on the sand island, dashed to pieces in an instant. And now the party leaped out and kept her off.
Some days they made only a few miles with more than 3,000 to go. Clark was a practical and plain-spoken man. He usually commanded the men on the river and kept records to make an accurate new map of the West. As they pushed up the Missouri toward present-day Omaha, Nebraska, they were deep into Indian lands. Traders and trappers had been up here, but no well-armed military party.
A party of Otoe and Missouri Nation came to camp. Captain Lewis and myself sent them some roasted meat. In return, they sent us watermelons. Been up the greater part of last night with Sergeant Floyd, who is as bad as he can be. He expired, having said to me before his death that he was going away. We buried him with all the honors of war, much lamented.
Pushed on into the heart of the Great Plains.
The immense river. Water is one of the fairest portions of the globe. Nor do I believe that there is in this universe a similar extent of country.
In this vast grassland, Lewis discovered new species, including animals that barked, like little toy dogs, he wrote. They would be named prairie dogs. there were also buffalo hunters. Lewis and Clark were under orders to be friendly with native tribes.
Children, we have been sent.
Lewis also let them know, in full military dress, that the United States now claimed their land. There were only medals and small gifts for now, but in the future, Lewis told them, other Americans would arrive with a wealth of trade goods.
And to inform you that a great council was lately held between this great chief and your old father.
Lewis and Clark were passing through a world unknown to them, but well known to the Arikara, Sioux, and Omaha, to the Crow, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet, to more than 170 tribes and hundreds of thousands of people living west of the Mississippi, hunters, farmers, fishermen. Some traded peacefully, some were regularly at war. The Teton Sioux were the most powerful tribe in the Middle Missouri. They controlled traffic on that stretch of the river and had stopped traders before. The expedition now approached Teton land and a tribe that had the superior numbers to annihilate them. The encounter did not go well.
3 of the young men seized the cable of the boat, and the second chief was very insolent, declaring I should not go on.
Finally, Chief Black Buffalo waved his men off. The entire expedition could have ended that day near the present site of Pierre, South Dakota. They had come some 1,600 miles in 5 months, but ahead lay the long, bitter cold of winter on the northern prairie. Lewis and Clark hoped to stay near the Mandan and Hidatsa, buffalo hunters who were often visited by traders. The tribes welcomed them as friends, and the Mandan called them Mushi, the pretty people. Together, their 5 villages were home to some 4,000 people, more than lived in St. Louis at the time. Nearby, the expedition settled in for 5 months of bone-chilling cold.
The thermometer stood at 45 degrees below zero. Snowed all day. The ice ran thick and air cold. 3 men frostbit badly.
The captains knew almost nothing about the land of the West. They hired an interpreter, a French fur trader named Charbonneau. He had 2 young Shoshone wives captured by the Hidatsa in a raid. The captains asked him to bring one along to help interpret on the trip. She was about 16 years old and pregnant. The Hidatsa called her Sagagawea. Tribal leaders such as Black Cat told them of a chain of mountains far to the west that could be crossed in half a day, but they would need horses. Sagagawea's tribe, the Shoshone, would have horses and might help. In winter quarters they called Fort Mandan. The captains prepared a shipment for President Jefferson to be taken back downriver by some of the men in spring. Clark drew a map of the land while Lewis packed what he had collected, including dozens of new plant and animal species. Sagagawea gave birth in February, a difficult labor assisted by Louis. Tiny Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau became the final member of the expedition.
About to penetrate a country in which the foot of civilized man had never trodden. The good or evil it had in store for us was yet to determine. I could but esteem this moment of my departure among the most happy of my life.
Sagagawea quickly grew more important to the expedition. She showed them edible plants and roots, white apples, wild artichokes, and licorice. When a boat overturned in a strong wind, it was Sagagawea who saved their most important items. Off the river, they faced other challenges. Present-day Montana, the expedition came to a fork in the river and a critical decision.
Which of these rivers was the Missouri? To mistake the stream would not only lose us the whole of the season, but would probably so dishearten the party that it might defeat the expedition altogether.
The Hidatsa had told the captains to look for a waterfall as proof that they were still on the Missouri. What Louis found would test the strength and spirit of his men. The Great Falls of the Missouri were 5 massive cascades. To continue, they would have to carry everything vital to the expedition on a detour more than 17 miles around the falls over rough terrain.
We all believe that we are about to enter on the most perilous and difficult part of our voyage. All appear perfectly to have made up their minds to succeed in the expedition or perish in the attempt.
At every halt, these poor fellows tumble down and are asleep in an instant. Some are limping from the soreness of their feet, others faint and unable to stand. Yet all go with cheerfulness.
The grueling portage left the men badly worn down with mountains still to come. But they willingly followed their captains, very different men who seemed to command as one. There is no record the two friends ever argued or disagreed on an important decision. They had lost almost a month at the falls, and they needed to find the Shoshone and obtain horses before the cold weather set in. Sacagawea now recognized places from her youth and could help guide the men, but the Shoshone remained elusive. Finally, Lewis set out with a scouting party to search for them.
If we do not find them, I fear the successful issue of our voyage will be very doubtful.
Clark and the rest of the men labored on through frigid water that was barely passable. They planned to reunite further upriver once Lewis had found the Shoshone. Somewhere was the Missouri's source. From there, the men hoped for a quick mountain crossing and then an easy ride downstream to the Pacific Ocean. Ahead of the boats, Lewis made an historic discovery.
I had accomplished one of those great objects on which my mind has been unalterably fixed for many years.
The source of the great Missouri River had finally been found. From the Continental Divide above, Lewis hoped to see a river heading westward toward the ocean. Instead, he confronted a scene of crushing disappointment.
I discovered immense ranges of high mountains, still to the west of us, with their tops partially covered with snow.
The need for horses was now more important than ever. The very next day, Lewis finally made contact with the Shoshone and persuaded them to accompany him to meet with Clark on the river. Once again, the fate of the entire expedition was in the hands of native people who had never seen strangers like these before.